Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We have a great guest today, David Simpson. David is the COO at Big Brothers Big Sisters of Southern Arizona. He's a fellow Wildcat and has been working in the nonprofit sector and in youth development for over 12 years. David, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Cam.
Yeah, thanks for being here, David. Awesome that we finally got carved out some time to mesh up our schedule to get you on our show.
No, absolutely. Happy and excited to be here. So thank you guys for having me.
Great. Well, let's dive right in. The first thing I wanted to ask is if you could tell us a little bit more about Big Brothers Big Sisters for anyone who's not familiar with the organization.
Yes, absolutely. So we're a youth serving organization. We serve ages 6 all the way up to 21 years of age. We're a mentoring organization. I really want to point that out because I really do believe in mentoring. What I've realized is even if individuals don't consider themselves mentors or don't consider themselves to have been mentored, some form and fashion, we all have gotten to where we've gotten because somebody took out the time to invest in our success, right? Invest in our potential. And so that's really what Big Brothers Big Sisters is about, pairing up a young person with a volunteer and adult who wants to take time to engage with them, spend time with them, help build their skills. And we do that on a one-on-one basis. And so we got great outcomes. The goal is to make sure our youth is really striving toward positive development, making good decisions. And yeah, I'm excited. Like you said, I've been in the youth development for a long time. I've been with this organization for 3 years. And so it's been really fortunate to see the work that we do every day. Yep.
Great. Well, one thing I'd like to dive into on that, and we've talked about this a little bit, was mentorship. It's really an underrated form of learning because when you have a mentor, you are unpacking so much knowledge so much quicker than you could ever get it yourself. Whether it's somebody going through coaching rugby or business coaching or anything like that, you're getting years worth of information and years of experience boiled down to one 5-word slogan that they came up with, which is always just so helpful, I think.
Absolutely. And the thing about mentoring is it's for any age group. Mm-hmm. It's not for just young people, right? I can still have a mentor in my 60s by somebody who has gone through the experience or been around longer, or maybe he has experienced things that I myself has not, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a good thing about mentoring. And, sometimes I think people say, I don't need a mentor. I have all my parents and my family, but it's not really about that, right? Mm-hmm. I grew up with a mom and a dad. However, I still had people in my lives that supported me in different ways that maybe my parents could. And so that's always exciting.
I know that's
think of it as an accelerator. Camden, you touched on it a little bit, but what a mentor is going to do is help you instead of it taking, it took them 10 years to get to the point they're at. Well, they're going to teach you 10 years and you're going to do it in 6 months or less.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have all the best practices of how they did it. So it's an accelerator and it's a great tool to use. And it's a great way to give back too.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I think that touches on, bringing the mentorship full circle. The big piece of that is if you want somebody mentoring you want to be mentoring someone else also. You got to make sure you're feeding that loop all the way around.
Absolutely. You should be setting somebody else up. And you said it perfectly, Camden. If somebody else has supported you and got you to where you at, ideally you give it to somebody else. Perfect.
And I'd say as I was prepping through this, I thought you have the example. I know I've talked with, for those of y'all who don't know, my fiance works with David, but we talk about it a lot, how you get folks who they kind of have this awkward situation where there are both parents in the picture and they don't feel like there's a place for them as a mentor, but that's completely untrue because you always have that extra spot. And as I was thinking that and preparing for this episode, I thought back to how many boys we played rugby with that would go to you for all this huge life advice, Dad, and they'd come and ask you all these questions. They had 2 parents at home that could have helped them out and they were successful parents, but for whatever reason, they would go to you because you were the mentor that they wanted to get direction from.
Well, and sometimes it's better to have somebody from outside too. They get a different perspective on things and, you feel like, disclosing some information to mom and dad is uncomfortable, but, disclosing it to, your rugby coach or somebody who's mentor you in business or whatever, even somebody from the church, you might feel more comfortable, talking to them about various things that really feels kind of awkward when you talk to mom and dad about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And to piggyback on that, Otis, we have parents who, the mom, for example, she would say, "Hey, my daughter's 13. She's losing her mind. I need some help." You know what I'm saying? And it's like, well, why does a girl need a big sister when she have a mom in the picture? But it's really deeper than that. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes the connection is just off. And so what we've noticed is parents will also often say in the program, "Hey, my child and I have a better relationship because of the mentoring relationship they have outside of this," right? And so that's always real good to see.
Now, I know you started off with a Boys and Girls Club. So how are they different? Could you give us a little bit of, background on both, I guess, or the differentiator, if you will, in the business sense?
Yo, absolutely. So Boys and Girls Club is considered primarily an after-school program. They have actual brick and mortar sites that the kids go to after school. And so most of their work and their engagement happens inside those walls, right? You probably have anywhere between 80 to 120, sometimes, 200 kids in a building who come across different activities, specifically enrichment activities that gears toward arts and crafts, education, positive behavior, and things like that. Big Brothers Big Sisters while we have a local office, we don't have a direct site that we do that engagement. Our engagement is out in the community because it's one-on-one with the mentor.
Right.
So it actually could happen anywhere and not specifically at a location. That does not mean, though, Otis and Cameron, that people in the community don't always get us confused, right? So we get people that call Big Brothers asking for Boys and Girls Club, right? I know you probably was like, "Hey, David work for Boys and Girls Club," right? I think you got people going to Boys and Girls Club when I was there saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a big brother," and it's like, so.
Wasn't it last year? There was like a Super Bowl ad or something,
right?
And it was Big Brothers Big Sisters, and they said Boys and Girls Club.
I'm telling you, during the Super Bowl, our national office had a great partnership. They set that thing all up, and then they got to the announcer saying Boys and Girls Club. So everybody wearing the Big Brothers Big Sisters color was like, "Oh my goodness, come on, guys, you got to." But we worked through it though, so I don't know. It's a lot.
That's funny because I was one of those people.
Right.
How long, when I first met Jessica, how long I just referred to her working at Boys and Girls Club.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's the thing. My mother did it for 2 years. She'll be at her, dealing with her church friends, and she'll be like, "Yeah, David, I told my girls at church that you got a promotion at Boys and Girls Club." And I said, "Well, now wait a minute now. I haven't been at Boys and Girls Club for 3 years." Right. And so she just wasn't registering as Big Brother, Big Sister. So I think she got it now. So they just kind of wasn't there.
Well, from the outside looking in, it almost comes off as, y'all are almost the two rival companies. You can put it that way.
Right.
Is where it comes off. Yeah. Is there much I was about to say cross-pollination in the market. That's probably not the right way to put it for y'all. But do you have many kids that are in both programs, or is there not too much of that?
Yeah, there is some overlap, right? Because the programs are still different. We could have some kids who have big brothers that go to the Boys and Girls Club, or Boys and Girls Club kids that actually come and get mentors, right? But I will say that I think there are always room for these organizations to work more closely together. But you guys know that in a place like Tucson, where there's 2,300 nonprofits, right? There's more nonprofits in the state. I mean, based on Tucson's size, there's more nonprofits in Tucson more than any other city in America when you consider the size of Tucson. So when you take that into account, there's always nonprofits fighting for the same dollar. There's always nonprofits fighting for oftentimes the same type of funding from the same funding source. And so partnerships sometimes can be difficult to do. But my thought is always everybody stay in their lane. Everybody be really clear on what their mission is and what they're good at. And then you could find a way to partner with somebody who does something different, even though they might serve the same population.
Right. Like how you were saying, how you can have kids that go to Boys and Girls Club and they still have mentors, they still have Big Brothers, Big Sisters.
Right.
As long as they're aware, really, like go back to the competition side of it, treat it like a market, really. As long as they're really aware that you're offering something complementary to their side of it, then they're, keeping in your lane, like you put it, you can still get that kind of growth.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect world, right, Camden? Like, obviously it's not always that pretty, but ideally one organization is not saying, no, we don't want you to have access to these kids because we're going to serve these kids. It's like, well, it's Tucson. There's a lot of underserved youth in this community. There's no way that one organization can do all of it. Right. That's a crazy way of thinking, which is why Tucson in general, I would assume, have so many nonprofits. Everybody's trying to serve a goal and achieve trying to achieve success somehow, some way. So, yeah.
Well, I think that's a good stepping point then to go from that. I want to talk a little bit about y'all's rebranding process as you go from Big Brothers Big Sisters of Tucson to Big Brothers Big Sisters Southern Arizona.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you kind of take me through what led to that and the challenges y'all faced along the way?
Yeah, so our leadership team and our CEO, Marie Logan, really started to think about how can we as an organization better serve rural communities? How can we serve communities, underserved communities, more than just in Tucson direct service zone, right? And so we looked at a lot of different ways to do that. And so we kind of pinpointed specific areas we wanted to focus in, one being Marana, one being Safford, communities that could really use a really strong mentoring presence. And so in order to do that, we decided, and the board agreed, why not change our name to Southern Arizona and expand our reach a little bit. Guys, Tucson and Phoenix is always at war, right? In Tucson, Phoenix is called, their agency is called Big Brothers Big Sisters of Central Phoenix. Which I get, right? No. Big Brothers Big Sisters of Central Arizona.
Oh, okay.
Is the name of that agency, right? And so they kind of serve a region. But after looking at the region they serve versus where we were serving, we realized there were communities that kind of fell in those spots where nobody was serving them.
Right.
And so I bring that up to say that, here in Tucson, we're like, well, how do we serve those communities, right? Because Phoenix is not going to devote resources all the way down to a certain point, right? But that doesn't mean we can't find a way to do better in those areas too. So,
okay. Did technology play a big role in that? Because that's one thing as I was thinking of the mentorship, y'all, like you said, you don't really need the brick and mortar location as much. You can kind of set things up and manage them a little bit more remotely. Did advancements in that help out in any way?
Oh, for sure, because it'll definitely have to be some remote locations, right? Not so much Marana, it's 40 minutes up the road, but Safford, which is more 2 hours plus, that we'll be using that as, a lot of technology to help make those things happen, right? Not everything will be on site in Safford. All of the staff in Tucson won't be able to go to Safford and things like that, and vice versa. There will be some in-person meetings, but a lot of that will be using technology to really help drive that communication.
Okay.
But our work in Safford is not going to be we're Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Tucson, and we just happen to serve Safford. What we really want to push is we are Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Southern Arizona. Safford is a community that is a part of our fabric.
Right.
We're all one group, and we're gonna do right by that community just like we would Tucson. You know what I'm saying?
Do you think it's something that as you scale up to that larger size and try to fill that full market, that you will be pushing more brick and mortar type things where you would have the branches in different locations, or do you think that can be filled with the technology and other resources?
Great question. I would argue brick and mortar is not really our fabric. And keep in mind too, brick and mortar is expensive. Boys and girls clubs, that's a huge expense for them across the country because you're paying for a physical building to staff a physical building. Now you're talking about lights and utilities and all that jazz. And so
keep it simple.
You can keep it real simple. It's like, where we're going to meet at in the street at that corner light, right? Like it can be a lot better than inside of a building. Well, and again, the goal is for the volunteer to take that young person into the community and engage them at a really high level and introduce them to a lot of different things that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to. And so it works well not to be to a certain location. You know what I mean?
How'd you identify the need to expand? I mean, was there some data? Was it a gut feeling or what?
A little bit of both. A lot of meetings with different organizations, some data. We also looked at, again, we felt like we could better serve rural communities. And under the federal guidelines, rural communities have a very specific idea of what that looks like. And so there's some communities that I would consider rural, but not really.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, and while so And for example, you take a place like Miranda. Miranda has some rural parts, but not all of it is considered rural.
Right.
You know what I mean? You have to go further out up 10 West to really hit some of those really rural locations. And so I would say probably within the next 3 to 4 years, our presence in those communities are going to be just as strong as our Tucson presence. And you know, we'll look back and be glad that we started moving in that direction for sure.
How do you identify mentors, and do they get any training?
Yeah, you know, Otis, a lot of training goes into our volunteer process. We're very careful to not place a volunteer with a child and them not have any experience or understanding on the best way to support that child. Our volunteers get from 4 to 6 hours of training that first year of being matched. They're in an orientation and training 2 to 3 hours before even coming in contact with the child. So we go over things like positive youth development, best practices, ways to engage, proper boundaries. And you know, and that's your fiance's job, right? Like what Jessica does is she leads and oversees a team that works with those volunteers and those parents and those children to make sure that rules are being followed. We're hitting our outcomes. We are meeting the goals that the child has for themselves and the goals that parents set forth. Volunteers are feeling supported. I mean, just a lot that goes into it. And so I'll allow her to not sleep at night thinking about that stuff. Well, I'm just a guy here for the looks, right? Like it's just a lot that goes into making that stuff work. And so, because we're not just throwing children up in the air and adults to find out who drops on who, right? You have to assess the volunteer. You have to assess the child, find out what are the volunteer's strengths versus the child's weaknesses, what are the best fits. And then you got to support the mess out of it.
What tools do you use to do those assessments?
That's a really good point. So we have our national office we have a pretty strict form and a pretty strict guideline on what we use to properly assess the volunteers. We go through background checks. All of our staff are trained and degreed on how to look for red flags, how to look for specific things in the interview process. So the assessment is not just the physical assessment. The assessment is also background, interview, references. Those are all things we use to assess whether or not a volunteer should be in the program, right? Then we take that information and come up with a final conclusion, and then we look for that volunteer for that child. So with the child, we're just not assessing the child, but we're also assessing the family to make sure we're supporting. The parent is going to be engaged. The parent is going to be locked in and do their part for the match relationship to be really successful.
So a lot of hands-on then is what I'm hearing between, you know, your team that is assessing the volunteer of whether or not they're going to be a good mentor and giving them some training, and then also assessing the child and the child's family then. Absolutely.
You know, I don't know how all mentoring organizations run, but I would tell you, Big Brothers Big Sisters, I would argue is a leader in the mentoring community because our practices are considered best practices, and because there's so much that goes into making sure the kids are safe. You get what I mean? Like the whole point is to make sure the kids are safe. We're actually achieving real outcomes and we're reaching our goals, and the volunteers have a great experience as well.
Going off of that, what kind of metrics do y'all use to measure the success or effectiveness?
Oh, great question.
Is it as simple as a return rate or a retention rate of if the match goes on for 10 years and it's going well, or is there something more economic if you put it that way?
You're asking a lot of good questions, Camden. You're asking a lot of good questions. Well, listen. So here goes the thing. So we look at their grades. We look at on-time grade progression. We look at their attendance in school. We look at, we interview when we have surveys for the volunteers to see if the volunteers are feeling good about the match, how strong they are. We do the same thing with the child. Hey, when you're having a problem, do you go and ask your volunteer? Do you feel safe with your volunteer? Do you trust your volunteer? How do you grade your relation? You know what I'm saying? Is a child avoiding risky behavior? There are several questions we asked during our survey process to see if they're making better decisions, right? And so, I mean, there's probably 3 or 4 surveys we use. There are probably 3 different assessment tools we go through to collect data to say, okay, is this child really achieving these outcomes we're looking for? And then we have something called a YODP, which is a Youth Outcomes Development Plan. The child and the volunteer and Jessica's teams comes up with that at the beginning of the match. And they use that to determine what they believe are the primary goals for that match in year one. Mm-hmm. And then they use that to help grade whether or not we're helping them reach those goals along with the volunteer. And so, oh man, it's super intentional.
Oh yeah, well, shoot! I was gonna say you knocked that right out of the park because you're hitting it on the self-reported side to make sure that they're all feeling good about it. You hit on the objective side of everything.
Absolutely.
And then you got the final metrics there. It all comes together. That's great.
Yeah, it all comes together.
And part of the reason we asked,
must be some really interesting data that's collected, and is anything done with that data, in the greater child development, outside of Big Brothers, Big Sisters in that sense, child development type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, our national office uses that data for several reasons. Number one, to keep our practices up to speed with the current youth population. With youth development, it changes pretty drastically every 10 years, right? Is what people suspect because, a 9-year-old is a new 13, a 13-year-old is a new 18, right? I mean, they really they move that quickly. Mm-hmm. And I learned that coming from Boys and Girls Club. Like I left Boys and Girls Club, but then 3 years later, I realized, oh man, I don't know the dances anymore. I don't know the slang because I was working with kids on a daily basis.
Oh yeah,
coming Big Brothers. So like, what are you doing? What does that even mean? And that was in a 3-year span, so it can happen that quick. And so,
welcome to the old man club.
Right? Yeah. So I still try to go out there and act like I know what I'm talking about, but and then the other piece of that is fund development, right? We're a nonprofit. A lot of our revenue comes from individual giving and donations. So you really need people to believe in your cause. And you can't do that unless being able to show them those metrics, those outcomes, right? And so we use that for all of that for sure.
Great. Part of the reason I wanted to ask that question for you is so last week we had Matt Schmidt, head of the Engage Foundation, on. Okay. We were talking some about the effectiveness of mentoring and coaching and all those type of things. And there's a study that I cited to him that goes back, and it was in New York, I believe. And what they basically did was they took these hundreds of kids, divided them up randomly, gave half of them mentors, half of them not mentors, and then looked at the economic outcomes that they had. What they found was that the mentoring didn't work. But what the interesting was, as they dove into the data more and more, they found that about of that 50%, half of those kids went to a summer camp. And basically what happened was they had the troubled youth go spend a week together, and they got really good at being troubled youth. Okay. The other half that didn't go to the summer camp wound up getting the normal effect that you would expect from mentorship.
Okay.
And so it was one of those big cases of misleading data where you look at that at first and you're like, gosh, mentorship doesn't work at all. And then you realize that, it's like you just got to do it in the proper format. And that's the good thing, that you have to have all those metrics and get everything in the right place to make sure that you're really having that true effect. And it sounds like y'all definitely have done that.
Really great point, Cam, because you're going to think if you pair a young person up with an idiot, it's not going to help anybody, right? It gotta be with somebody who is literally the right fit, in the sense that they are looking to have a positive influence on that child and help that child achieve their goals. You know what I mean? Because anybody can have an influence on somebody in the wrong setting, and that's not what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to pair young people up with a positive, caring adult, and that's a key piece of all this. Yeah.
Camden, every time you tell that, well, every time, now that's twice, you tell that story, which makes it every time. I envision Lord of the Flies at that summer camp.
Oh yeah,
right. Oh my goodness.
That's
that's going on.
That hits it right on the head, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So, hey, David, how would you describe your leadership style? I mean, you're the COO of
COO
of Southern Arizona's team. How would you describe your leadership style?
Well, up front, I'm not a micromanager. And if Jessica tell you something different, do not believe her. I just I don't believe I'm a micromanager.
We're gonna have her on next week.
Right? Yeah, have her. Man, please just David confirmed and said that he's not. I really like to empower and put staff in a position to be successful, but also grow in their role. Otis, I'm actually the type, I prefer to develop staff in such a way where over time they do believe they can take my position. You get what I'm saying? Like, I don't want, if something was to happen to me, right, where I get hit by a bus I don't want there to be a situation where, oh my goodness, all hell is breaking loose, all hope is lost. I want staff to feel as if they've been well trained and supported. We've talked through enough issues and problems. We've worked through enough conflict together that they say, okay, this is what needs to happen next. Right.
So it's a next man up type thing.
Absolutely. And so now, granted, I'm fortunate, right? I have staff like, Jessica, for example, who's really good at what she does, and she performs at a really high level. And she's naturally a leader. So it allows me to move in such a way where I know some of the day-to-day is getting done. But my goal is that anybody who has a skill set can achieve that as well, if they want it bad enough. You know what I mean? I think sometimes as supervisors or managers or as bosses or whatever you want to call it, we sometimes want more for the staff than they want for themselves. And sometimes it's when we get ourselves in trouble. It's like, you got to also want to be successful in what you're doing. And so I try to lead from that. A lot of transparency, a lot of communication, sometimes over communication, just to make sure people are clear on expectations, because we're big on accountability. Right.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. The trust in your team, right? You hired them for a reason, and you give them give them that power to succeed, and you want them to succeed. So that's another key trait that I always like to talk about with my leadership development, is that confidence. You're confident in who you are and your decisions. You're not concerned that, hey, that was a much better idea than I've got, so yeah, we're going to do that. Right. I mean,
absolutely.
You're not afraid of that in your team, because that's why they're there. They're the experts, right?
Absolutely. And they work directly with the youth. And there's going to come a time when I can no longer do this job. Right. And that's the thing, like at Boys and Girls Club, I did it in my 20s and in my early 30s, but there's coming times when I phase out and the new youth development professionals come onto the scene. So you want them well prepared to deal with what today's youth are dealing with. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Well, as a follow-up to that, how do you sustain your improvement? What techniques, tools, what do you do to continue your improvement as a leader and a person?
Yeah, I surround myself with mentors and also other really good leaders. I've always been promoted quickly and moved up quickly, so it's easy to do two things. Number one, get stagnant and believe that you have arrived. Or in my situation, I'm quick to be like, okay, I've done this, I've achieved this, what's next? You know what I mean? It's always a what next. But I have mentors in my life that just say, Dave, you need to relax. You know what I'm saying? Like, embrace all of this and just enjoy the moment, because this is part of the experience. You know what I mean? So when I go and look at, the mentors I have in my life, it's like, oh, I was doing that for 15 years. I'm like, 15 years? What the heck? That's
only lasted 6 months.
Who wants to do this for 15? But in the grand scheme of things, 15 years is not a long time, right, Otis? Right, Camden? It's like, if he's 61 and he's just now hitting his mental and his developmental prime, then 15 years, 20 years ago wouldn't be a big deal. It's like, oh, I did it from my 30s to my 40s, and now look where I am 20 years later. But young people, sometimes we struggle with that because time to us looks different. It's like, man, I don't want to be 41 still. It's like, well, now, wait a minute. You look at people like Hillary Clinton, who was in her 70s running for president. Donald Trump is 73. Bernie Sanders is 91, right? My point is,
that old?
My point is,
that's the peak there too.
That's a peak. Yeah. My point is, people are doing great things. People are just hitting their big time careers. People are just starting to really get grooves in their 60s and 70s. You know what I mean? Like, great things are happening. The average CEO, I think I read in America, is like 57 or something. And don't quote me on that. That's what I remember reading. And so it's just like, we paraphrase a lot of statistics on here. Don't worry. Yeah, great, right? Almost said the Impossible Burger is not real. All right, I'm just kidding. So my point is, I wouldn't understand that unless I had people that surrounded me that said, hey, be patient. Be patient.
When I think as you talk about how you keep yourself moving up and challenging yourself like that with mentors, and I can see how that very well reflects into your leadership style. And it's, goes back to classic, leaders create leaders.
Absolutely.
And that's really what's happening, is if you have the mentors who are pushing you to be the best, then you're going to wind up pushing other people to be the best.
Absolutely.
Inspired people inspire other people, definitely.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Success breeds success too, right?
Oh yeah.
So what do you do? And are there volunteers other than the mentors, or because one of the things that I've seen and I'm curious about what I'm leading to is how do you handle that conflict between the full-time paid Big Brothers Big Sisters team and the volunteers who want to do XYZ or whatever? How do you create that balance of success there?
Yeah, great point. So two things. Our volunteers who are volunteering in the mentoring capacity, we make it up front really clear what their role is, right? Their role is not to replace parents. We have to be really clear about that, because also parents don't want to come in thinking they're being replaced. Like, I'm not asking for an adoption agency. But to be fair, there's some parents who come in and be like, low key, I need an adoption agency. It's like, well, our volunteers are not babysitters, right? They're there to help encourage and reinforce what you're already teaching them, and give the parents support. So that's that piece. The roles are clearly defined, right? What Jessica's team is responsible for and what they are, trained to do when it comes to making sure the relationship is strong. And then there's volunteers who are not trying to be mentors, but they're just volunteering to the organization. And when it comes to that, normally what we try to do is just make sure, and internally we're clear on what help we need, and we talk about that. So when volunteers come on board, or especially interns, they know what's been asked of them, right? So we don't have a situation where you have interns, for example, from the college wanting to do something that doesn't fit our agency.
Right.
So a lot of that pre-work is kind of done up front.
And, it wouldn't be an episode Cam and Otis show if we didn't say, well, it goes back to communication, right? Golden rule. It's all just communication. If you outline what your expectations are, then you can really prevent them from muddying the waters in that sense.
Absolutely. And people always talk about communication, but in theory, but in practice, it's hard. You know what I mean? You think, I communicate well, but it's like, do we really though? I learned that in marriage. It was just kind of like, I thought I was a great communicator. Then I realized I don't communicate well at all. And so you just kind of work through that, figure that out a little bit.
Yeah, I've worked with several mid-level managers, helping them understand that. And, it's two pieces. Is one, information does the boss want? And then how does he digest or she digest that information? So what's the tool, the communication tool? So it's not just giving them the data. Here's the data. Bleh. It's what's the presentation of that data, and so how do they understand it? And as a leader, you got to do that down also, not just it's up and down, that you have to be able to communicate and understand what's needed below. What's your team need to succeed, and how do they take that data in? How do they absorb that information? And the same thing, how do I tell my boss what we're doing and what great things we can do, or how do we solve that problem? And then give him the information, and how does he digest it?
I love that, because it's one of those things. I always think it's so funny, and I'd love to see if you had the same type of experience. But for me, when I was going through at my ag biz classes, you got to take a lot of communications classes as well. And oh my gosh, I guess partially maybe picking it up from you, Dad, or whatever. It was natural to me. But you go through and you're learning that stuff, and then you meet people who have never taken that class, and they're not very good communicators. And you start realizing they're not, you don't need all the vocab words of, the decoder, encoder, the noise and all that different stuff. But that stuff's real. Whether or not you want to put the term to it or not, that's real. You can say something, and no matter how you think you're saying it, it matters how they think you said it. And that's the big difference. And you got to recognize that when you're communicating.
And not just oral communication, but also written. And I learned that with writing emails. It's like, sometimes, how you write an email, you're like, what does that even mean? How dare they? You know what I'm saying? It's like, what's the exclamation point for? You know what I'm saying? It's like, and so I've learned over the years, even how you write in communication is important, because sometimes how staff read it is not how you meant it, and vice versa. It's like, I don't know if it sounded. Do you read through it again? Like, oh, I can see how they took it that way, right?
Right.
By the way, there's an excellent Key and Peele skit on there. Just throw that in. So yeah, oral and written is important for sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
Oh, I thought you had one.
Oh, no, I do. So Who do you interact? Who's your boss? I know the CEO, but is there a board of directors that you report to also? And I'm kind of curious how you kind of stay in our communications theme.
Yeah, so I directly report to our CEO, and then her bosses are the board of directors. Yeah, so I don't deal too often directly with the board unless we are reporting on our finances or updating them on program, and that happens in the board meetings. But normally that communication is with our CEO. Yep, for sure.
So where do you see Big Brothers Big Sisters Southern Tucson going in the next 5 years?
Great question. I think we're going to be really strong in serving 3 additional communities outside of Tucson. I think we'll probably increase in our youth served. We continue to get bigger in that area. Just in the last 3 years, we've increased 12 to 15% in our youth served. And so I think we'll continue to get there. It always requires funding, right? I have not found a tree yet that has money on it. So
I got one, but I ain't telling you where it's at.
Right? Yeah. Well, and you should not post this podcast if he has a tree that got money. So yeah, I just don't. Yeah, I don't see why there's any limitations to what we're going to be able to do. I think the big piece though is being able to sustain that success, and normally that comes with financial barriers, right?
One piece on that, and as you're growing with it, is there any issue that you would find as far as a gap in your volunteer base for the mentors, where you and I think I'm setting you up for it should be a home run then, because that would be why y'all have the Mentor 2.0 program then, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Mentor 2.0 is filling in the gaps when it comes to there's always these hot topics, right? When it comes to in America per se. And right now the hot topic is, or the hot issue is graduation rates. The hot issue is on-time graduation. In the state of Arizona, for every one counselor, there's 906 students.
Wow.
If you take all of if you were to look at the schools throughout the state, and in Tucson, that ratio is even higher. So what you come across is there's a lot of there's very few counselors and a whole bunch of students. So there's gaps there, right? You have a lot of students that need a lot of support in our program, or you have a lot of students that need a lot of support when it comes to being prepared for high school graduation and preparing for life after high school. And there's just not enough counselors to go around. So the Mentor 2.0 program basically is trying to take that ratio and make it 1-to-1, getting educated and well diverse and volunteers who have been in the work field and pairing them up with a high school student and basically guiding them through that process since they've done it, right? And they do that with the support of our team here. Then when you talk about other gaps, Camden, we are still over close to 200 kids on our wait list, with like 88% of that being boys.
200 kids on the waiting list?
200 kids on the waiting list, and 88% of them being boys. And so, and that's just not in Tucson, that's across the country. If you look at other Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the percentage of boys is always higher. And we just don't have across the country, men tend not to volunteer as heavily as women.
Right.
Now, the average length of the match tends to be longer for the men than the women. Ain't that weird?
That's interesting.
It's like once you can get a man to commit, he'll stick with it, right? That's another story. Yeah, that's for another Cam notice. But my point is, what's interesting is that we are always going to have boys on that waiting list. We're going to always need men. Even if you were, and my boss say this all the time, Marie, even when you promote to men specifically and advertise to men, we will still get women sign up. They are more creative and they are just quicker when it comes to figuring out how they can give back. And so, any men out there listening, I would always encourage you to find a way to give back and share your experiences. It's really that simple.
That's a great segue. I'd love for you to plug that. How do people get involved?
Absolutely. You can go into our website and hit the volunteer link, and it will take you straight to an inquiry page for you to find out more. We have a staff that will call you within 24 hours to start giving you more information about our program. Or you can call directly to the office and speak with Melissa. She's our customer relations specialist, and her job is to update you and give you insight into what we do as a program, sign you up for an orientation. And there's no commitment up front. What I mean by that is if you just want to come to an orientation and find out more, you can do that, right? We want people to sign up once they are sure they want to make that commitment, because we want to make sure we're coming through for that young person.
So what's the commitment? What if you like an on average, how many hours a month or whatever?
Yeah, great point. So we ask for 18-month commitment up front, just to make sure that we don't have a situation where the young person, the youth have adults in and out of their lives. Oftentimes that's a situation already. So as an agency, we don't want to add to that, right? We don't want to add to that stress. And you're talking about only 4 to 8 hours a month.
That's it?
Right. That's it.
Wow.
4 to 8 hours a month. Nothing crazy. You might have to give up Seinfeld, right? Or you might can't go to a movies one weekend. All we're saying is, heck, if you're going to go to the movies, take the young man with you. 4 to 8 hours a month can change a young person's life. Engage, volunteer, and for you to give back. All we're looking for is consistency. Our average match length right now in our program is 30 months. So we're making some really good changes, and we're really some really good impact.
That's great. Could you what is the websites for anyone who wants to check that out?
Yes, soazbigs.org. So that's Southern Arizona bigs.org. So soazbigs.org. Click on that link. Look at our different programs. And again, just hit that volunteer link or hit that donate link. We are a nonprofit. So if you want to hit the donate link, you do it all, people, on their website.
That's right. I mean, time is our most valuable asset. But you know what? If you feel like you don't have the time, then hit that link and just make a donation. I mean, every little bit helps, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We're always looking for donations. We're always looking for those who believe in our mission and want to do some individual giving.
Well, I'd like to just start thanking you at this point. I mean, I really appreciate you carving out some time today.
Absolutely.
And, we always wrap up our show with what we learn. And I think I went first last week with our last episode.
I think you say that every week just to set me up.
But got a good one. I
I hope I stole yours this week then, because you do that to me all the time.
All right. I let the lawyer go first last week, didn't I?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I let the lawyer go first. So we'll let the youngster go first today.
Cool.
Well, and I really hope this is yours. That the ratio for the ratio for counselors to students, that was just baffling. That's something with the Engage Foundation, I work with youth, and in a fringe sector working with rugby side of it, but that youth development is still a big part of what we do, and that's still our overarching mission, is to engage them and put them in a position to achieve. Yeah. And to realize that it's almost 1 to 1,000. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And you said Tucson's even worse than that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, and I think so. The nation's average, I think, is 920 or something, and then you get to Arizona, because we don't support and bring in a lot of resources to education. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to get on my tangent on that. The ratios are even higher. Yeah, it's up in the thousands. Yeah.
Well, how about you, David? You didn't get mine, so.
Dang it.
Told you. David, what about you? What'd you learn?
Well, I'll just say I appreciate you guys for having me. Camden, I thought the example you used was very important. And when we start talking about leadership and the right type of leadership and that leadership trickling down, I think that's always good conversations to have. So I think you guys are doing a great work. So I appreciate you. I hand it over to you, Otis.
Yeah, well, I knew nobody would steal mine, because mine was a pretty naive. It was like, what? Oh, wow, I never thought about it that way. That Big Brothers Big Sisters is a mentoring organization. I was just one of those,
Yeah.
It's so simple. It's a much simpler way of understanding it, because I was always like, well, that's kind of cool. You get to have like a kid hang out and support that kid. mentoring.
Yeah.
So sometimes
now it'll be easier for you to brag about your future daughter-in-law.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I mean, I am a victim of the blinding flash of the obvious many times.
Yeah, no, good for it.
But hey, David, I really appreciate you taking some time out today. Great to talk to you. Great to get to know you. And hey, for our listeners out there, it doesn't take much. Man, an 18-month commitment, a handful of 8 hours would be overachieving by the standard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
8 hours a month, and that's nothing, man. I mean, that's a couple hours a week if you think about it. So, and if you don't have the time, if you're working multiple jobs, starting a business, whatever, then put a couple of nickels in the donate button. I mean, every little bit helps, and that's a great program. And those kids that we're helping are going to take care of us when we're older. So think about it that way. You start giving back, and it'll come back to you. So I really appreciate it, David. Y'all doing great work. Great work for the kids in Tucson, and the greater big brothers, big sisters around the U.S. is doing great work, and I love it.
You're about ready for a telethon right now. Get some fundraising going.
Yeah, phone lines are open now.
Oh, yeah, David, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you.